The morning the removal van appeared outside Unit 14, I was standing at my kitchen window with a coffee I had already forgotten was in my hand. That should not have been a significant moment. People move in and out of apartment buildings. It is one of those ordinary events that barely registers. A van, some boxes, a stranger with furniture. Except that the woman stepping out of the passenger side of that van was someone I had not seen in 10 years. And the last time I had made a decision I had never fully stopped reconsidering. She had not changed in the ways I had expected. She had changed in the ways I had not thought to prepare for. I stood very still at the window for a moment longer than was rational. And then I did what any sensible adult would do when confronted with something that rearranges the inside of his chest without his permission. I refilled a coffee I had not yet finished, and I sat down. That did not help. My name is Daniel Ashworth. I am 34 years old. I work as an architectural draftsman for a mid-sized practice in the city, the kind of work that involves precision, long silences, and a near-pathological attention to things most people walk past without noticing. I live alone. I have lived alone long enough that the apartment no longer feels like a temporary situation and has begun to feel like a personality trait. I have made my peace with this, largely by telling myself it is a preference rather than a pattern. Her name was Reese Callahan. I had known her since we were 12 years old, growing up 2 streets apart in a suburb quiet enough that everyone's front doors were an open secret. We had orbited each other all through school. The particular closeness that exists between 2 people who find each other instinctively, but have no framework for it at the age when it begins. She had a way of holding a conversation that made you feel she had already considered your side of it before you spoke. Her handwriting was too large for margins. She thought faster than almost anyone I had known since. She carried a small, well-worn Calvino novel in every bag she owned. Always the same novel, always a different copy, spine cracked at the same page. She had told me once, sitting on the curb outside school at 17, that it was the only page that actually mattered, and everything else was just getting there. The first copy she had ever owned she had pressed into my hands when we were 16, with her too large handwriting already on the title page, in case you need it. I had never returned it. She had never asked. We did not speak the language of what existed between us. We were 17, then 18, then life intervened in the way it always does, different universities, different cities. The particular inertia of not saying a thing for so long that saying it begins to feel impossible. By the time I thought seriously about finding a way back, I had talked myself into believing I had probably imagined the whole thing. I had not imagined it. But that is the thing about self-deception. It is available at all hours, and the pricing is extremely competitive. The building manager had slipped a note under every door 3 days prior, informing residents that Unit 14 had a new occupant and requesting the usual courtesies. I had read this note and thought nothing specific about it. I was at my own door on a Saturday morning when the lift opened and she came out of it. The corridor smelled faintly of the coffee shop on the ground floor and of the cold that had been sitting in the building since the heating caught up. That dry, particular September chill that collects in staircases and doorways. She was carrying a floor lamp under one arm and a box of books under the other. Her jacket was 2 sizes too large, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and she was moving with the focused energy of someone who had decided not to ask for help and was now committed to that decision regardless of how practical it was proving. She looked up. There is a specific quality to the moment when someone you have not seen in 10 years sees you across a narrow hallway. It is not like meeting a stranger, and it is not like meeting someone familiar. The recognition arrives before the person does, which means the face you produce when they appear is not the face you would have chosen. She went still. half a second. Perhaps less. Then she said, "You live here." Not a question. Not quite a statement. Something occupying the space between them. "Third door," I said, which was the most accurate thing I could produce at short notice. She nodded once. She was looking at me in a way that was very carefully not looking at me too long. "Of course you do," she said, in a tone I could not entirely categorize. Then she turned back to the lift and the remaining boxes. I stood outside my door for an unreasonable amount of time before going inside. That evening I could hear her moving around next door, the muffled sounds of a new person in an unfamiliar space. Furniture shifted. A window opened and then closed. It was the most ordinary possible domestic sound. It settled in my chest like a weight I had set down years ago and just been handed back without warning. I want to be precise about what I told myself in the days that followed. I told myself it was coincidence. A city this size, these things happened. It was not a situation. It was geography. I was 34 years old. I had a functioning life. I had, on several occasions in the past decade, believed I was building something with someone. None of those occasions had led anywhere lasting, which I had attributed to any number of reasonable explanations that had nothing to do with a specific name I kept returning to, and then not examining. The particular sensation of being seen by Reese, precisely as you were, not as you might be improved, was something I had never quite found a clean equivalent for, and had never found a clean reason for either. I told myself this was nostalgia. Nostalgia has a name, a diagnosis, articles you can nod at. You can file it correctly and continue. That was not nostalgia. That was a feeling that had simply been waiting for new information. I am not pleased about how long it took me to admit I had stopped calling it something else. The first time she knocked on my door, it was a Wednesday evening, approximately 5 days after she moved in. She needed the building's Wi-Fi password, which the manager had forgotten to include in the welcome letter. I wrote it on the corner of an envelope, and she folded it twice and tucked it into her jacket pocket. She said, "Thank you," and then, in a tone attempting to be casual and not quite arriving there, "It's good to see you, Daniel, I mean that. It's strange, but it's good." She left before I had assembled a response. I held that sentence in my hands for approximately 20 minutes before deciding it was a normal thing to say and meant nothing in particular. She had said the word strange like someone who had already thought of a more accurate word and had made a decision against using it. I noticed that. I chose not to note that I noticed. 3 weeks later, her building door code failed at 11:30 at night, which happened to everyone eventually with the older keypad, and she rang my buzzer because it was the only number on the entrance panel she had memorized. I let her in. She was carrying a paper bag from the bakery around the corner, which she had apparently walked to specifically despite the cold, which I thought was an interesting choice and which I did not mention. We stood in the corridor, and she offered me a pastry in the manner of someone who had brought exactly enough for 2 people and had a reason prepared if I asked why. "I didn't know you were still in the city," she said. "I've been here 5 years, I said. "I know," she said, then looked at the paper bag and added quickly, "I mean, it's a small city. People mention things." Too quickly. The correction arrived before the original sentence had fully settled. The way you try to walk something back while the sound of it is still in the air. The way you say something you've already said many times in your head and have momentarily forgotten you have never actually said aloud. I did not point this out. I ate the pastry. She went home. The third moment was smaller. I passed her in the corridor on a Saturday morning. She was back from a run, earphones in, cheeks cold from the wind, and she pulled one earphone out and said, "How's work?" with the specific register of someone who already has an answer in mind and wants to hear it confirmed. I told her it was fine. She said, "Good. I was thinking about something you said once. About how technical drawings are just very organized hope." Then she put the earphone back in and went inside. I had said that. I had said it when we were 19, during a conversation on the steps of her student building that I had assumed, for 10 years, she had long since forgotten. My capacity for self-deception, at this point, began to develop noticeable structural faults. There was an evening in October when we arrived home at exactly the same moment. She from somewhere, coat buttoned to the collar, hair damp from the rain, me from a late finish at the practice, and we rode the lift together in a silence that had weight to it. The lift in this building takes 32 seconds from the ground floor to the third. I know this now. In those 32 seconds, neither of us spoke. I could hear rain against the shaft above us. The lift smelled of damp wool and the coffee she was carrying. Her left hand, the one closest to me, rested against her coat pocket. Not relaxed. Still the way something goes still when it is paying careful attention to something it is trying not to pay attention to. She was looking at the floor numbers. When the doors opened, she said, "Good night," and walked to her door without looking back, and I stood in the corridor for a moment that was longer than it needed to be. 2 evenings later, she knocked again, this time with no practical reason offered. She was holding 2 cups from the coffee shop downstairs, and she held one out and said, "I don't want to go inside yet. Do you have somewhere to be?" I did not. We sat in the corridor with our backs against the wall between our 2 doors, which was not particularly dignified and which suited the moment entirely. She talked about the years she'd spent in Dublin after graduating, then Edinburgh, then the decision to come back. I talked about the practice and the city and the particular logic of staying somewhere long enough that you stop meaning to and simply are. At some point she said, quietly, without lifting her eyes from the cup, "I kept thinking you'd have moved. Whenever I thought about coming back, I told myself you'd have gone somewhere else. Everyone eventually moves." I said nothing for a moment. "I didn't," I said. Something in the air between us shifted and did not shift back. It was a Friday. She had knocked for a reason that was practical enough to use and small enough to be something else. A package left at my door by mistake, I think, or a question about the heating schedule. The reason resolved quickly. And then, she was still standing in the doorway, and the quality of her not leaving was different from all the previous ones. She looked past me at the bookshelf, just inside the door. The third shelf. The Calvino novel, the original, her copy, the spine repaired with tape she hadn't put there, and the title page still carrying her handwriting from when we were 16. She went quiet. "You kept it," she said. "You never asked for it back," I said. "No." She looked at it for a moment longer. Then at me. "I stopped telling people you were just someone I grew up with a long time ago. I stopped being able to explain what that meant in a way that felt accurate, so I stopped trying. I thought about you when things were difficult. And when they were good, too. Maybe more than. I'd think Daniel would find something in this. Daniel would know exactly what to say." Her voice was completely steady, the steadiness of someone who has made a decision and stopped arguing with herself about it. I told myself it would stop, that it was just history, proximity by childhood. It didn't stop. The doorway was very still. I said, "You don't have to finish that if you'd rather not. We can go back to corridor neighbors and coincidental timing. I won't make it a thing." She looked at me with the expression I had last seen at 17, when someone had underestimated her, and she had decided to be amused rather than offended. "Daniel." Her voice was even. "I moved to the city I knew you were in. I moved into the building with a vacancy on your floor." A pause. I wasn't going to say anything. I had an entire plan for not saying anything. "But you kept the book. You have it on the shelf where you can see it, not in a box." She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. I never stopped waiting for the right moment. I just ran out of patience for not using this one. She waited. I looked at her for a moment that was long enough to be honest. "Every time something significant has happened in the past 10 years, I said, there has been exactly one person I wanted to tell first. The name hasn't changed. I stopped asking myself why about 2 years ago, because I already knew, and it was becoming increasingly embarrassing to keep pretending I didn't." I looked at her. "I had convinced myself you were gone." Finished with the chapter. "You were not gone." She stepped forward once. I placed my hand over hers where it rested against the doorframe. She looked down at it. Then at me. Then she stepped through the door. From down the corridor, the building manager's metal trolley, the one with the stuck wheel that announced itself 10 seconds before arriving, came rattling past at speed, accompanied by sincere and creative swearing about a blocked drain on the second floor. We both turned at the sound and then looked back at each other, and she laughed. A real one. The kind she had always had, slightly too loud for the moment and entirely right for it. And the doorway stopped being a threshold and became simply where we were standing. 6 weeks later, she had a key, not ceremonially. She asked if she could have one in case she forgot hers again, which was a practical explanation that satisfied neither of us and which we left alone. By the spring, she had strong opinions about my coffee order that she expressed with a regularity I found unreasonable, and she found entirely appropriate. I had started leaving a spare blanket folded at the end of the sofa without discussion, which she acknowledged by never once mentioning it. The Calvino novel migrated from my shelf to her shelf, and then to the table by the window, which is where it has been since. She has not asked for it back. I have stopped framing the possibility that I might return it as anything other than fiction. Years later, when people asked how it started, and they did ask, because there is something about two people who fit together in a particular way that makes others want to locate the seam, she said she'd moved in for the view. I said she'd moved in for the parking. We left them to work out which of us was closer to honest. What she had actually said, standing in my doorway on a Friday in November, I never stopped waiting. Neither had I. I had simply been less honest about it for significantly longer, and had a much less convincing reason for the book on the shelf. What would you have done if the person you never quite said the thing to moved in right next door, and it turned out they'd been waiting too? And have you ever gone back to somewhere, or someone, because you couldn't quite finish walking away? Leave your answer in the comments. If this one stayed with you, a like and a subscribe means I'll keep making them, and I'll see you in the next one.